Steve Garcia with 620 Studio.
This is the next video in our series of training videos for WordPress, and specifically the page builder theme. If you have not had a chance to go over the initial two videos, I highly suggest you watch the video for WordPress introduction and also the Divi introduction, as we won't necessarily be going over any of those details. We're going to jump right into one of the modules. So the next series of videos we're going to be producing are going to be regards to individual modules, how they work, how to update them, change them, and really go into a little bit more specifics on how each of these modules work, because this is where you're going to be really spending most of your time updating your site using these individual modules, because that's where the content is basically being stored. So we've showed you how sections and rows and modules work, how you can create different columns within the rows, how you can move the modules around. So we're going to start with the most basic of modules, which is the text module. Again, I'm using the same web design page that we've used in the past. It's going to have the same information, but we're going to dive into the text module a little bit more, because that's where the content is being stored. You can see that we have basic. On the web design page, we have some basic text, we have an image, and we have some more basic text. So how this is going to work is all of this information is being stored within this module itself. It's the text module. These three lines that are stacked, that basically means you're going to be changing the module settings. It's where you can edit. So you can see that the section has its own settings, the row has its own settings, and the module has its own settings. Won't necessarily go into the section of the row until later. We'll look at specifically this text module. If I click on the three arrows, you can see it brings up a box. This is your text module settings. You have some basic settings that you'll see, and you can see here's the content. You can see this probably looks familiar. This is similar to how the basic WordPress WYSIWYG editor looks. You have the ability to be able to choose headings. You can bold, italicized. You can even add media, which is how we add this little gears image here. Be able to add links, those type of things. So this is, this should seem somewhat familiar to you, especially if you've used something like Microsoft Word or something along those lines. These are going to be it should feel relatively similar, and you should seem familiar. So this is, you can see where we have all the content on this page. Of course, I exit out of it. You can see this is where all the content is being stored. You can go and type it like you need to. It even has its own spell check, so you can see almost every single word is and this Greeking is highlighted, but you can see that it has some basic spell checking or alerting. One of the first things you'll see is you have the ability to be able to choose text color and text orientation. Text orientation is pretty self-explanatory. You can either have the text left, centered, right, or even justified, which is evenly spaced across, kind of like a newspaper is. The text color dark and light. Dark is basically going to be your basic black or gray, however we have it styled for you. If you change it to light, it's basically going to turn all this text white. It's not going to be necessarily useful on a white background, as everything will basically be hidden. However, you'll notice that on your website, and as most websites, we tend to use a lot of color, at least we try to, utilizing colored backgrounds, so that way it provides emphasis. And what you'll notice on those, if it has as a background, you'll see that this has been changed from dark to light, so that way it has white on some kind of color background, which I think is useful. So you'll notice that is on there. You have the ability to change the text, be able to add links. You can align it even on here. You can add headers. So let's say I'm going to call this what we do, which is what we did before. So what we do, if I choose that as a heading 1, you can see it gets to be nice and large. If I hit save and exit and I update here, when I go back to the page, you'll see we have a nice big heading 1. That's going to be kind of basically your page title. You have the ability to have heading 2, heading 3, those type of things. Usually by default there's headings 1 through 6. You can see they change in size. You can bold, italicize, you can even do bulleted points and number list. You can do block quotes, which aren't used very often, but in case you want you're wanting to quote somebody. Inserting links. This is pretty typical where let's say for instance you want to highlight something, and I'm going to go and insert a link. You see this, it brings up a little bar. I'm just going to, for the sake of I'm going to put 620studio.com. Save that, and now this becomes a link going to 620studio.com. If you want to go full screen, which most times I think this should be plenty large enough for what your needs are, but you do have that ability. So you can see that all this content is all here. It's it's readily available. If I choose save and exit, that basically closes on the little window, and if you hit update, it will then update the site to where you can see that we have, not only do we have our header any longer, now we have this nice little link for what we call lorem ipsum, which then would take me to the website, our website. Going back into the module itself, most of the modules you'll see will have general settings, and you also have advanced design settings and custom CSS. Custom CSS, I will say you're probably not going to do a whole lot unless you are fairly comfortable with CSS. You can give individual things like IDs and class. Again, I would say that most of the time you're probably not going to use this tab. However, the advanced design settings may be something worth of use. Here you have the ability to be able to update some of the individual design, or at least sizes and colors for that specific module. So emphasis wise, if you wanted to make this text font size a little bit bigger, so right now we're at 14. If I go and bring that up to, let's say 20, let's just say 20. If I hit update, you'll see that this all got much larger. Probably a little bit not really readable. However, it's probably a little bit too large. However, if it is like say a call to action or something that you really need to provide emphasis for, so imagine this having a background color or something along those lines, and then you making this white. It's a little bit larger. It would then be something that would be have a little more emphasis, especially if you're doing like a call to action. Imagine like promotion, or even something that's really something you're trying to promote a little bit larger. I wouldn't necessarily go too far overboard with the sizing and that sort of thing. However, you do have that ability. If you want to change the text color, brings up a nice little color picker. So if you want to make everything a nice blue, hit update, come up here. You can see everything is now a really nice blue. Again, be careful, especially from a design standpoint. We usually try to set things for you in a nice, designed way. However, just letting you know you do have abilities, options, and that sort of thing. Line height, letter spacing, all that information is there. Now you can see you also have background color, background image if you want. You can even have margins and padding. If I use a background color, I'm going to go ahead and just do let's go and do a black. And if I hit update, the text should basically almost disappear, just because of the fact that, well, you can see it's more of a gray, but you can see it's almost unreadable. This is where if you end up changing it from dark to light, you'll see that now it becomes readable for the most part. Black is a bit harsh for this. However, it does work in that aspect. It even changes the header color as well. Now the one thing you probably will notice right off the bat is, wow, that's hugging up to the edge really close, and doesn't really look very good. This is where margining and padding come into play. Margins and padding, they may sound the same, but actually they work very differently. Margin is going to be the spacing that is around the box. So imagine this module is, you don't have to really imagine it's there. It's a big box, it's a big rectangle. If I added something directly above it, it would be, if there was no margins, and let's say if it was something else with a black background and it had no margin, it would be basically touching right up, and it would look like it was just a bigger black box. If it's a blue box, you would see the blue would be basically touching the black. If you add margin to the top, it would then increase the amount of space between those two modules. Padding is the amount of space within the box. So if I add margin to this, if I added a top margin and a side margin, basically this box and the text would basically get smaller. It wouldn't get it wouldn't add any spacing. It would basically just get smaller. If we add padding, however, let's see, if I do 25 across the board, 25 pixels, by default it changes to pixels. If I choose save and exit, and I update this, the box doesn't get bigger. However, the text itself within the box gets smaller. So now you can see it's not really hugging it. So it's been framed a little better. By default, the text modules have 0 padding and 0 margining, those type of things. Generally, what I try to avoid doing is adjusting the padding and margining within a specific module, and actually doing that more at the row and section level. So I'm going to go ahead and turn these all back to 0 so they don't look good. Oh, and I'm also going to move I'm going to get rid of the background as well. So now we're kind of back to where we were. I'm going to put this back to dark. So we're looking back where we were. What I generally try to do is I will do the changes more on the row and the section levels. We'll talk about this more in details in closer to the end of our series. But each of the rows and section do have their own settings themselves. You can see there's general settings, there's advanced design settings, etc. This is where I generally try to do a little bit more of the padding and the margining, because there's a little bit more control than you would have at the module level. So we'll talk about that in future videos, but for the time being, this is where, like I said, with the text module, it's a very basic module. There isn't a whole lot of some customization, but for the most part it's just a very basic utility type module. Next video we're going to be looking at is specifically how to work with images and how those actually work along with text. Again, if you have any questions regarding this video or any previous videos, you can always give us a call or send us an email at support@620studio.com. Thank you.